Hey everybody, just want to shoot an update on my 20-gallon open-topped office tank. I've got a German blue ram right now that has some sort of eye infection or something going on that's causing one of its eyes to bulge out significantly. It's not popped all the way out yet, but it is very clearly trying to. So I've been doing a few things to the tank. I've had some different suggestions from various people, and so I've got the tank under treatment right now, and I want to go over what I've been doing so far. The very first thing I did was I added some Epsom salt to the tank. Not a lot, about a half a teaspoon per gallon, just to put a little extra dissolved solids in the water in case that whatever was causing the eye to pop out had something to do with fluid retention in the fish. And it quickly became apparent that that was probably not the case. And so, in order to help the fish recover, I did put some regular old aquarium salt, some sodium chloride in the tank. So, I've got about 1 teaspoon per gallon, give or take a tiny little bit there, of sodium chloride in the tank in addition to the Epsom salt. I did not do a water change before adding the aquarium salt. I have also begun treating the tank with Maracyn Two, and I think that's going to be the most impactful treatment, is the actual medication. I think there's probably some kind of infection or injury or something going on in the eye. I did have quite a few people point out in my last video that the ram looked like it had white stringy poop. And so I was looking and looking and looking, and I'm trying to watch the fish to make sure it looked okay. And unfortunately, it's been hiding down in the corners. I don't know if you can really see it down there, but it's hiding kind of under the anubias against the glass. And that's what it's been doing quite a bit for the last several days. So if it does come out and give us a little bit of a look at it, you'll see what I'm getting ready to explain. And that is that this is a long-finned German blue ram. And if you look at its pectoral fins, it's got really, really long filaments that dangle well behind the tail fin. It goes all the way back behind the caudal fin. So I never did find any stringy poop on the fish, but I did go back and look at the video. I looked at the timestamp where everybody said they were seeing the stringy poop, and I can certainly see where people would say that. In fact, I had to look myself very, very closely several times, and what I've concluded it's just the angle that we're looking at makes it appear that there's this long string of poop dangling behind the fish, but it's not. That is actually one of the filaments off of its pectoral fin, believe it or not, dangling behind the fish like that. If it was long stringy poop, then it pooped it out and it was done, and it has not produced any more long stringy poop since then. So whatever that was, it was a one-shot anomaly, and I'm going with the fact that it was probably the filament coming off the pectoral fin, as opposed to the idea that it's got some kind of parasite in its gut or something like that. I don't know where it would have gotten a parasite. I've not really done anything that would have introduced parasites into this tank. So, having said all that, I've got the medication, I've got the salt, and then it was also pointed out to me something that I was already beginning to think myself, was that the temperature in this tank was too low for the German blue ram. If you've been following along with me, you'll know that that has been one of the things I've been actually sort of experimenting with this fish. Long story short, when I tried keeping them early on in my fish keeping hobby, I never had any success with them. I've come to believe that was because I never kept them in warm enough water. And while I was keeping this fish in very warm water in the upper 80s, then it looked fine. It was colorful, it was beautiful, it was active, and it looked great. And I lowered the temperature and lowered the temperature, and I finally brought it down to where most people were saying was a safe level for this fish, which was about 82 to 84 degrees. And that's when I started noticing the colors weren't as bright. I don't think that necessarily has anything to do with the eye popping out. I think that's an unrelated issue. But if the fish was already starting to suffer in the slightly lower temperatures, then having an injury and all that is not going to help it recover, being in water that's too cool for it. So I'm now working on bringing the temperatures back up. I've decided that regardless of what anybody says, around 85 degrees seems to be optimum temperature for this tank. The guppies still do fine at 85 degrees. I don't lose too much water from evaporation, and that seems to be about the lowest temperature where that ram really thrives. I think it could probably survive in lower temperatures like that, but I think around 85 degrees is where I want this tank to be for that ram to really thrive. So, having said all that, I've added a second heater to this tank, which I'm sure by now you've noticed, that bright red light glaring away. And that is going to hopefully be my primary heat source. I want to get that one up to where it's a little bit warmer than what this one calls for, because this one is just not cutting the mustard in this tank. And there's a couple of reasons why. One, I think it's too small. And it just always struggles. It's always trying to stay on. If you'll notice, it had just gone up to 30 and the light had gone out, and now it's back down to 29 and the light is on. I've got it set for 30 degrees. It made it to 30 degrees and it stayed there for about a minute, and then it dropped back down, and now it's struggling to get it back up to 30 degrees again. So that was one of my issues, is that this tank, that heater is just not up for this tank. I don't have a ton of circulation, so if I've got sort of a warm zone down here and it's right on the cusp of where I want it to be, how much cooler is it down at this end of the tank? So I definitely want a heater at both ends just to make sure I do have an even temperature in the tank. And I've also come to realize that I'm used to dealing with Fahrenheit temperatures, and the key difference between Fahrenheit and Celsius, while Fahrenheit might be a completely arbitrary measuring scale, it's a very close measuring scale. 1 degree Fahrenheit is not much of a temperature change, whereas 1 degree Celsius is significant. And if I've got this heater back here and I've got it set to what in my mind would be around 83 degrees, I'm thinking, well, if it drops 1 degree, then the thermometer or the heater will come back on. Well, in Celsius, when it drops 1 degree, I've now gone from, 83 degrees down to barely a little bit over 80 degrees. And that's a significant shift in temperature before that heater kicks back on again. So this heater is graduated on the Fahrenheit scale, and I've got it set, I don't know what it's actually going to amount to, but I've got the dial set to 87 degrees, and then we'll see where the tank settles in. You always have to kind of set that somewhere and then measure the tank temperature with an accurate thermometer and go from there. So while I have it set at 87, the tank might only be 85, and that's where, that thing's calling 87. And so once I kind of dial it in and know where I want it, then I don't have to worry about those exact numbers necessarily. But I do want to get the tank up at least a minimum of about 85 degrees. And then, of course, I'm going to keep running the full course of the Maracyn Two, and we'll see if that doesn't do the trick. So far, I don't want to get my hopes up and say that it looks like it's getting better necessarily, but I think it does look like the swelling is going down just a little bit. And if nothing else, it's definitely not getting worse. It's not bugging out more and more. So worst case scenario, it's just kind of sitting the way it is. And maybe as time goes on and maybe those meds start kicking in, because I just added the second dose. You do a big dose on your first day, and then you do a regular dose for the next 5 consecutive days, or 4 consecutive days, and you do a 5-day treatment. And then if the conditions haven't gone away, you'll do a second 5-day treatment. But it's basically like an antibiotic. You've got to do the full treatment, even if the fish is starting to look better and the symptoms go away. You've got to keep the treatment up for the full cycle. So I've begun that cycle, and now we're going to let the whole medication cycle go through with the warmer water and the additional salt in there. So make sure you're subscribed. You don't want to miss any of the updates I've got coming up on this tank or any of my other ones. You never know what it's going to be with me. And hopefully for once I'll have a fish that gets some kind of illness and I actually can heal it up and cure it. My luck with treating sick fish is pretty minimal. And this is one of my best fish, so I really, really hope I don't lose it, especially over something stupid like an infected eye. So, as I said, make sure you're subscribed, and that way you won't miss that or anything else I've got coming up. And don't forget, of course, this is my 20-gallon open-topped office tank. So, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you real soon on the next one.